Hi, everybody. I'm Viviana Mazza from Corriere della Sera, and we're here for the 11th edition of Book City. And I'm glad to introduce Lauren Groff, who is here with us to talk about her most recent book, Matrix. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, thank you for speaking with me, and thank you for this wonderful event.
So, Lauren Groff is an author who was born in New York State and lives in Florida. She wrote several books that have been really loved by people as different as Stephen King and Barack Obama. She wrote The Monsters of Templeton, Arcadia, Fates and Furies. Fates and Furies was also, a book that was very successful, and critics loved it too. And with Bompiani, she has also published a book that I personally really liked, that is Florida, which is a collection of short stories that I found fascinating a few years ago when Bompiani published it. Now Matrix is a very interesting book also because Lauren had not planned to write exactly about this book. She was planning to write about, to write a different book. And then she found this interest in this story. And the first thing I would like to ask her is to tell us a little bit about the story. I mean, the protagonist, Marie, is a woman who is in the 12th century. She's forced to become a nun because her mother was raped, and her mother is from royal lineage, but she is also not deemed to be feminine enough, Marie, because of her looks. And so she ends up becoming, though, a leader in this abbey, and she manages to change deeply the way it's organized, and in this very interesting world that Lauren creates for us, which is a world of women with several different characters in it. So first of all, I would like to ask you, to tell us a little bit about how you started creating this story, why, what led you to actually do this.
Sure. So at university, I studied ancien français, among other things. And when I was doing some translations from Old French into English, I discovered the work of an actual poet named Marie de France, who was the first published female poet in the French language. And I just loved her. I loved her so much. She wrote multiple books, but the one that stands out for me and for most people are her lay, which are these retellings of folk tales from Brittany that are spectacularly weird, right? They're vibrant, they're full of color, they're full of life. There's a queer werewolf story. There's a story about a fairy. There's a lot of courtly love stories, and they're just beautiful and brilliant, and they seem to be thrumming with a sort of intelligence that I was longing to read over and over. So I just fell in love with this book in particular, with this shadowy figure of an author whom we don't know anything about, because unless a woman in the Middle Ages was related to royalty, was the sister, the daughter, the mother of a king, or she was a saint meant to be hagiographied, you don't know much about these people, but they're sort of, their lives are lost to history. And so Marie de France's actual life was lost to history. And there was this gorgeous silence that I found really compelling, right? This absence of narrative that was very rich with possibility. She could have been an abbess, right? Some people think she might have been Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter from her first marriage with the King of France. We don't know, though. So I carried this book in my heart, and this shadowy mystery figure in my heart for many years, for decades, actually. And I tried to write multiple novels about her. and none of them succeeded. I tried to do a translation of the lay. It was terrible. It wasn't good. I think someday maybe I'll do one that's actually not horrific. But one day I had this wonderful fellowship at Harvard University. It was at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies, where it was magnificent because they allowed you to come, and the whole purpose of this was sort of interdisciplinary joy, to listen to your fellows in, say, geography or in astrophysics, in all sorts of fields that are not familiar to one specific academic setting. And for a novelist, which, I mean, we are basically bowerbirds. Our only job is to go out into the world and gather ideas and bring them back, and think about the ideas over the course of years. So I was just in love with all of my fellows. You know, I wanted to write a novel about black holes after listening to the astrophysicist, right? It was magnificent. And then a friend of mine named Dr. Katie Bookish, who teaches at Notre Dame University in Indiana now, gets up, and she was incredibly beautiful, very radiant. And she's so in love with her topic, which is 12th century nuns and their liturgies and their liturgical structures. So I was sitting in the audience, deeply, deeply in love with my friend's talk. And Marie de France comes waltzing back into my mind. And it's the collision of two things that made me put my other book to the side and actually pay attention to Matrix, which sort of announced itself as a secular vision.
Okay. So it's I'm curious to know why the translation of the lay was so bad, and also like to link this to the style and the way you write this novel, because at times it sounds like a prayer, at times it sounds like a melody, and you know, it is clear that you're doing here something to connect to your source of inspiration. So I would like you, I know it's always difficult for writers to get into this part, but I think it could be very interesting.
Sure. So my translation was bad because I think that I was too solemn. I think that the translation needs to be done with a sense of play and joy, and I was too self-serious and too grave. So I think if I were to come back, I would play a lot more. I would have more fun with it. And you're right. The style of my book is very much in conversation with the style of the Lay of Marie de France, but it's also with the style of multiple medieval styles that I encountered when I was researching this book. I think one of the things, you know, I wanted textural variance, right? I wanted there to be a moment of great solemnity, almost prayer, and then the next moment would be slightly slapstick or something a little bit funny or a little bit wry, right? And I wanted that to sort of be part of the everyday fabric of the life, because I think that, at least from the New World, right, from the United States of America, all we know of the Middle Ages is all we've seen in movies, right? So there's the profound flattening effect, the Monty Python effect, where everything is, you know, seen as being very dark, very grim. Life only was, you know, 14 years, one procreated and then died, right? And that was sort of the idea of what the Middle Ages were. And I was really interested in actually exploding or expanding our conception of what the Middle Ages were to encompass equally profound, if not more profound, emotions, right? And variance in ideas and thought and experience of life at the time. So I had a lot of fun playing with different modes of expression in the book, and I did go back to a lot of the prayers of the time, a lot of the language of the time, in order to try to get the rhythms down in the English in particular. And I have to say, in Italian, my Italian translator is Tommaso Pincio, who is one of the best writers in Italy and the most amazing translator. And I'm so lucky, and I love him so dearly. So I really feel like only he could have done it, and he did such a great job.
Yeah. Another thing that you just said about fiction and how, you know, we don't know so much about the lives, I mean, of the Middle Ages, but also specifically of women in that time. And you create this world of women crusaders you create this world of, where there's, this woman, Marie, she's a queer lover, and, she has all these relationships. And and I wanted to ask you about the importance of using fiction, and it's a bit tricky too. I mean, you're creating something, you're setting it at a time when all of this, though, it's like in between, right? It's almost in between fiction and nonfiction. And is it a struggle for you? Does it come naturally? And what is the way in which it is received? Because sometimes things that cannot be easily categorized might be difficult for people, or maybe welcoming because they're different.
Yeah, so I think about this a lot, not in composition, but always as the book is about to go into the world, because I really try to not think about reception as a book is about to go into the world. I think it keeps me from actually working on the book that is calling to me. So, from the beginning, I thought this was it is sheer fiction. It is fiction informed by a good deal of research that I did. And I wanted it to have a bit of a flavor of the fable to it, because the lay of Marie de France are full of magic, right? There's a boat that magically sails itself across the seas, for instance. And I felt like perhaps, at least in terms of narrative of the time, the narratives of the time, this was just, it's almost like magical realism was just sort of the foundation of a lot of the narratives of the time. I mean, it was this many centuries before the invention of magical realism, but that's what they were doing. So, and also, I mean, in terms of the Catholic Church of the time too, miracles were everywhere. I mean, the hand of God in all of its mystery and enigma was seen in all places. And so I wanted there to be sort of a lightness of reality, right? The reality is sort of shifty, right? It slides between things. And I think part of what I was working toward was I wanted this book that was set in the 12th and early 13th century to be speaking very, very clearly across the distances, across the time to our period now, 21st century. And I wanted the 21st century to be speaking back. I mean, I really, we're caught in a particularly ahistorical moment in history at the moment. And I know that you in Italy are suffering through that as well as we are here in the United States of America. But I want to pay attention to history. I want to pay attention to the way that there's cycles, and even though we believe ourselves to be in constant forward progress, we're constantly slipping back into very retrograde cycles too. So, I wanted the sense of past and present being constantly in conversation. And I had to do that somewhat. It was tricky, right? Because I had to do that with a sense of fable and a sense of sort of play and a sense of like this 21st century consciousness that's very explicitly in the text on purpose in order to sort of speak back and forth. So it was just a lot of editing and a lot of like,
imagine.
Yeah.
Like, how many edits do you usually do to a book? Like, what is your process?
So yeah, my process is wild, and I would not recommend it to anyone at all, ever. So I have certain things. I have anxiety and I have OCD, which is, obsessive compulsive disorder, which means that I could spend 5 years on a single sentence. So I've learned how to get around that by writing drafts in longhand. This is, for instance, my notebook. I use these giant Muji notebooks. I can't read my own handwriting. It's like very messy. It's awful. And I just write it's terrible. And I write the whole draft of the whole book in a short period of time, and then put it to the side and start it over again. And I do that over and over again. And it seems like it would be a huge time waste, but it actually saves me time because I'm not sort of fixated on the language until it's time for the language to come in, which is generally about, for Matrix, it was 8 full rewritten drafts. And then I try to put my vision that I built over these drafts on the screen, and then I do edits, like the print out and cut up and do all sorts of things like that. But I actually find that the most of the book gets written in the spaces between drafts, right? As you're putting the book to the side and sort of coming to an understanding of what you'd actually done, the things that remain from draft to draft are the things that are alive and should be in the draft.
Yeah. That's quite interesting, and I also wanted to go back to a thing that you just said about how the book talks to the present time, because in America specifically, this is a time when we've seen the Supreme Court reverse Roe v. Wade. We've seen. Now, I mean, I don't know whether for the midterm elections that will be a huge source of mobilization or not. Like, we're all waiting to see what happens in that sense. We've seen, state by state, a lot of activity, a lot of activism. But what happens there is also that it's different conceptions of how a woman's role in the world should be, and what her rights should be, and what control she can have on her body, and different women sometimes have different opinions on that, and they are trapped in patriarchal structures in their head, right? And your book talks about that a lot. I mean, your book talks mostly about that. And so I wanted to ask you, of course, you were writing it before knowing that what would happen to Roe v. Wade, but how does it talk back to you, like now, like after what you're living in the US and also living in a state like Florida that is particular in that respect?
Yeah, so I mean, I did know that Roe v. Wade was going to be sent down if the Supreme Court was allowed to become partisan. I knew it. We all knew it. I'm an activist in reproductive rights. I've been working on the board of Planned Parenthood, which is our major organization to protect the rights of all people to control their reproductive futures. So I've been working on this for most of my adult life. And we all knew it was coming down the pike if these people were elected and stole the election, which they did. It was devastating, and yet we knew it was coming. So I have known for a decade or so that this was about to be struck down. Roe v. Wade, to be perfectly frank, in a totally legal manner, was not a very solid case that the Supreme Court had. So, all this to say that I mean, of course, I was profoundly devastated for the pain that is going to be inflicted on people with uteruses in this country, and for the unwanted children. It's been sort of a nightmare of mine, what is happening now for a really long time, and sort of the rise of fascism, although they call it republicanism here, and it's not, I think what's really interesting is it's not my job as a novelist to be polemical, right? It's not my job to try to convince people of one thing or another. I actually find that to be very bad fiction when it's written in order to convince people. But it is my job to pay attention, right? That is basically my only job, is to pay as close attention as possible to what is going on in the world and try to translate that into narrative, into story. And of course, as a private citizen, I have opinions, very, very profound and very deeply held opinions, and they're going to seep into the text no matter what. So all texts are political, right? Because it's a method of communication between one person and another. Communication is contingent on the definition of power, or the trait of power, or the description of power. I engage in these things fearful that I'm maybe coming close to polemicizing, knowing that really my number one thing that I'm trying to do is just pay attention and to try to tell a story that is a story that's very close to my heart. And the fact of women through time, that we have been held within these patriarchal structures, right? These power structures that are much larger than any individual. And it's our opportunity to beat against those bars, or to try to open them and push through, or to, I guess some of us, like Marie, actually in my book, she, for most of her life, she pushes really hard against the hierarchical structure of the church, and yet she finds herself replicating it, and imposing it upon her own nuns, right? Even though she doesn't see that that's what she's doing, because that's what power does, right? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And I think that these things occur again and again, and I was terrified of this figure of a woman who does not know that she is condemning people that she loves and the people around her to the life that she herself hates, right? So yeah, all of these things came together at once. I fear this is probably not my only, well, not fear, this is probably not my only novel that's going to talk about this gilded cage that women have been put into for millennia.
Yeah. And I also wanted to ask you about the other characters, aside from Marie. And I mean, you create this whole universe of characters. There's of course the ones that she loves, like as children. There's as almost like they're the daughters she never had, and she's. But there's also her love interests. There's the queen. I mean, there's this whole universe of women. And I wanted to ask you how this character, because Marie, she comes, from the inspiration of Marie, of course, but all these other characters, how did they flower up, around her?
Yeah, so yeah, Marie actually, believe it or not, she actually came out of the lay themselves, because I took the lay and the fables that Marie de France made, took from them the most vivid moments where I could feel a sensibility sort of thrumming through the text, and made a poem out of it, and out of that poem came Marie. And so I thought, how interesting if all the nuns sort of came out of a similar idea. And some of them were developed out of their functions, right? For instance, there's a nurse nun who is Welsh, and really she became a character really out of, her name is Nest, out of one, her name, and to the function that she serves to the abbey. And so she sort of bloomed out of there. And I'm happy that this is Italian, because my mom's not going to watch it. There's a nun that I actually based on my own mother, and I actually had a really, really hard time loving her. And I think that if you can't love your characters, you're probably not doing it right. So I spent years like disliking this character so much. Her name is Goda, and then suddenly I was like, oh no, I need to make her into my mom. So I invested Goda with parts of my mother, and now I really love her. I actually think that she's maybe my favorite character in the book. And when I showed it to my husband, he was like, you made your mom into a character in this book. And I don't think she would have noticed. I don't think she notices, but I think that that's one way to sort of invest a character with character outside of the frame of the story itself.
Right. So I just want to ask you now, what are you working on? What is the next project? You said this is not your last book, probably about women. You were working on a previous project. Are you going back to that? What is the plan now?
Yeah. So actually, thank you for asking. Matrix and two other books are in a very loose triptych in my head, like a Hieronymus Bosch triptych. And Matrix is the first one chronologically. And then the next one was the book that I was working on when Matrix came to me. It's called The Vaster Wilds. It's going to be out in the United States next fall, and I'm just now doing the copy edits on it. And it's about 1609 in, of course, Elizabethan period, but it's in Virginia with the first permanent colony of English settlers have arrived in the country. And I see it as a sort of a Robinson Crusoe story and a sort of inverted captivity narrative story. And it's, again, about the strictures of religion and the way that religion does keep us bound within these narratives that we tell about ourselves. And it's about a woman, and it's about survivalism, because believe it or not, that's one of these wacky things when I'm having deep insomnia in the middle of the night and can't sleep, and I'll watch survivalist like things on YouTube, like how to build a house out of nothing but sticks.
In Florida, you might need that.
Exactly. I know, we just had a hurricane come through and there's
Right.
still people sleeping on cots down south. It's really
Right.
terrible. Yeah, you're right. I mean, maybe it's a logical response to the state of the world. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah.
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 So you were saying you're watching this because, and it's also coming in this book. And there's a third book after that?
Yeah, I haven't finished it yet. I'm still working on it. It's driving me crazy. So you know how I do draft after draft. I think I'm on draft 13 of this one. And I just have to wait for the music to come. So I have the story. I know the story. But sometimes writing for me is just a process of listening very intently to the way that the story needs to be told. And I know that one of the drafts that I've written probably could be published, but I don't want a book that just like could be published. I want a book that's actually in which the form and the function are intimately connected, right? They have to be combined. I have to find the music, the rhythm, the patterning that is right for the book at hand. And it hasn't come yet, but it will. Hopefully. If not, it's fine.
I think it will, and we can't wait to read that too. But for now, I just want to thank you, Lauren, for talking about Matrix, and I wish our Italian readers will love the translation and published by Bompiani. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Grazie, Italian readers.